Probation was kicked in.
Oh, so they're coming back with a proposal.
Not the beaches.
So they're it's gonna be more than I just looked over 6. Okay. My phone says 6 o'clock, which is what we've been using in city council because the atomic clock is on. We're calling the joint city council planning and zoning meeting session to order at 6 p.m. on Thursday, November 13th. We have a quorum for city council.
And we have a quorum for planning and zoning. I'll call that piece to order too.
Thank you. If you stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Texas.
Honor to the flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Public comments, announcements, but I don't see anybody, so unless anyone wants to make a public comment. That was item 1. Item 2 for discussion. 2.1 discussion and possible direction regarding potential amendments to the Seabrook Code of Ordinances related to restrooms, portable toilets, and portalets, and direction of staff to draft ordinance language for future consideration by the Planning, Zoning Commission, and City Council. FYI, we are being live streamed or recorded. Stick with this camera back here, and that is a backup audio in case we lose audio.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight we're here to discuss temporary restrooms and where they're appropriate within our community, where they're not. Also a discussion about the possible use of a temporary restroom for permanent use. Tonight I created a little agenda. Again, I already kind of discussed the purpose, but what I hope to go over tonight is just first thing I want to go over is the overview of current city practices for portable restroom use versus permanent restroom requirements. An overview of facility types and use scenarios. Overview of common applications, construction site use, events, residential event use, and long-term use. Discuss temporary versus long-term use guidance. I think that's the most important thing. I think for really the purpose of tonight's workshop is I feel that there needs to be an ordinance. The public's kind of reached out. There's some conversation about creating an ordinance that addresses this. One of the topics is using temporary restrooms for permanent use. There's some discussion to have over that on really how that would work and how maybe it wouldn't. Regardless of that, I think there's a need for us to create an ordinance and some ordinance language and text that addresses temporary restrooms. So for all the different uses that we currently already allow, to provide us, staff, some guidance and some prescriptive rules that when people are doing certain types of uses with these, we have regulations in place that address how long they can be there, things like, if they need to be screened for the different types of uses, things like that. So if something comes up and we have a residential use possibly that has a temporary restroom because they're having an event, that within maybe a 72-hour period, we have a regulation that we can go out within a 72-hour period, they have to remove them. We don't have that type of regulation in place right now. So regardless of what we decide on the temporary and long-term use, we need to have some regulations in place to address these other issues to give us the authority to go out and require somebody to do something when one of these may become a nuisance. Discuss opportunities for consistency with zoning and development standards. Discuss permitting thresholds, administrative guidelines. And then once we get past talking about the long-term and short-term use of these, as we get into, I'd like to just kind of briefly go through these different elements of really setbacks, access, environmental aesthetic impacts, sanitation standards, and talking about ADA compliance if we're having special events, or even if these are allowed or permissible for long-term use, how they will have to have some restroom facilities that comply with ADA compliance for commercial uses. So, just real quickly, I want to talk about our current practices. So currently, our ordinance authorizes the use of temporary restroom facilities exclusively for special events, for construction sites, whether a building's being constructed or there's a construction practice going on, disasters and emergency situations, pursuant to an agreement with a property owner as a result of experiencing hardship during a natural disaster. We have that currently with a business on Nass Road 1. And then currently there is no allowance within our ordinances to allow this for a permanent use. And there's reasons for that, and we'll kind of go through some of that. Currently, the 2021 International Plumbing Code, which is our adopted plumbing code, only allows the use of temporary restrooms for construction sites, for temporary outdoor events. Permanent occupied buildings of permanent use are not allowed anywhere in the plumbing code. If you have a use within the city, you're required, or the plumbing code requires you to have permanent plumbed restrooms attached to our sanitary sewer system. So that's what the plumbing code states. And then emergency or transitional occupancies. So those are the uses that the code allows currently. If we're going to modify allowing permanent occupied buildings to have this, we would have to amend our plumbing code. Kind of getting into the International Plumbing Code, how it addresses permanent restrooms, it's all based on occupancy. And that's what this slide's basically explaining. It's based on occupancy type. You go to the building code, based on use and based on square footage, you come up with an occupant load for a building. You then take that information, you go to the plumbing code, there's a table, and within that table, you use that occupancy classification. It determines the number of water closets you have to have, the number of urinals, the number of lavatories. It even requires you to have drinking fountains or a water source for drinking water. And it's all, then you do a divider, and you come up with the number of women, number of men's restrooms you have to have. So that's how you calculate permanent restroom facilities currently in our code. And you use that method even for special events and other items. So if somebody comes in and they're having a special event and they're estimating an occupant load of a certain number, we are then going back and Nick will do the calculation. We communicate with our special events group, and we let them know how many restrooms that they would need to have for the special event. So it's even for permanent or temporary, you still use this method. FEMA, there's a lot of discussion as we go, historically we've discussed this on what FEMA will allow, what FEMA won't allow. FEMA does not treat a temporary restroom trailer, as long as it's highway ready and registered, as a structure. They treat it as a vessel. So it's treated like an RV. So you can use a temporary trailer within the floodplain as long as it meets those standards, and it's not anchored to a foundation, and it's not connected to permanent utilities. So FEMA will allow, as we discussed this, one of our situations that we keep dealing with and what's kind of facilitated some of this discussion is the park on Main Street. We are getting where the wastewater treatment plant is. It's going to be a park at some point in time. And there's discussion of the city using a temporary restroom at that location for more of a permanent application. And so that was one of the situations that was addressed as we started discussing this. The other catalyst for this meeting is we've had multiple property owners who have elevated restaurants. And for convenience, they want to be able to put tables underneath there for dining. And for convenience, they've requested to be able to put a temporary restroom facility or a trailer under there to serve those people under there. In that condition, they are complying with our plumbing code requirements because they already have their required restrooms in the building itself, and this is just accessory and for convenience. So I think that's one of the items. And then we all are aware that we have a business on Nassau Road 1 that currently would like to be able to use temporary restrooms for a permanent use, and I think that's another one of the items that's kind of brought this to light, and that's why we're discussing it. Just so everybody, I mean, we're all on the same page, everybody's seen this. Facility types, this is a typical porta potty. This is one of the uses that I'd like to write a requirement for. Everybody knows what they look like outside, and everybody knows what they look like inside. When I was putting this presentation together, I didn't want to gross anybody out, but we know they don't look like that after they start being used. And I could have shown you 3 or 4 pictures that were disgusting. So as we talk about these type of uses, typically they're temporary in nature because of the construction material that they're built out of, and typically how they're maintained. Trailered restrooms, this is an example of a trailered restroom. Again, as long as it's fully licensed and ready for highway use, FEMA will allow it within the floodplain, below base flood. Typically, this is what they look like inside. I did a lot of research as I went through this. There was a lot of information that I was finding as I was researching that there was a lot of communication that these aren't made for long-term use. So however we permit these, at some point in time know that these are designed typically and constructed before use between 3 and 5 years. If they're under continual use, it could be less than that. The materials in here aren't designed, it's more like an RV use, so it's something to talk about as we go through. The different scenarios where they're being used, you know, this is your construction site scenario. This is public special events, we're all kind of familiar. Something you don't think about very often, and this comes up all the time, is you could have a party at your house, and it could be enough people that you could have a public function at your house and this occur. I think that's why it's important as we discuss this and we start going through this process that you guys are thinking about how you would like maybe some ordinances and limitations put on this type of use. It's never been problematic in our community, but if it was, it would be nice to have something on the books that gives me the authority to address it. Temporary restrooms are often used for emergency situations. And then basically this is kind of just a definition that I created, but permanent occupied buildings and permanent use means the continuing indefinite use of portable, non-plumbed public utility restroom, including but not limited to chemical or vault type toilets as a primary or ongoing sanitation facility at a fixed location. I'm not going to read the whole thing for you guys, but this structure, this includes any situation in which temporary restrooms remain in service on site on an active construction event or temporary use authorization. This is kind of what we already just talked about. I kind of hit on this slide already. Typically, these facilities are not designed for permanent use, and that's why I believe the code does not allow it. It's not addressed in that way. And so again, this is just kind of rephrasing what I've already said. So I'm not here just to talk. I'm here for you guys to participate. So I'm pretty much done. I'm just going to kind of facilitate a lot of the rest of this. So I wanted some input from this group on what the feeling is of the group, temporary versus long-term use for this type of facility. I know I've talked to some of you individually, so I'll kind of throw it out there. I just want some opinions. I'm trying to get feedback because you all are aware this is the building code and the zoning code, which is where these two things will be addressed, all have to go to planning and zoning for a recommendation back to city council. So they'll hear all this first. So I just wanted everybody kind of be on the same page as we go through this and have both sides understanding before I start drafting anything. So I'm going to throw it out to you guys. I mean, just to get some feeling on what y'all's opinions.
I've got plenty. So let's talk about the business on Nassau Road 1. What is its current status? What are they using right now?
they're using a temporary trailer. So within the barge itself, so there's multiple things going on at that location. Originally, we set an occupant load for the yard based on the restrooms they had within the facilities they had within the barge itself or the building itself. And then when the agreement came around, there was an allowance for them to have some temporary restrooms at the yard, which allowed them to increase their occupant load. So a lot of the situation that we're dealing with at the yard, at the barge, has to do with they want to have a certain occupant load in the yard, and to do so, they have to increase their restroom numbers. Right now, they're accomplishing that with a temporary restroom facility.
And they have, besides their temporary restroom facility, they have another porta potty that's an ADA accessible porta potty, which is essentially sitting on the ground and is not capable of being towed away. Is that
That's correct.
And so how long does it get to stay there?
Right now, it's per y'all's agreement, so I
First
believe they
quarter.
were granted another
First quarter,
extension of
first
6
quarter
months.
2026.
And so when that period's up, they'll either have to remove the tent and the temporary restrooms, I believe, which was addressed, or they're going to have to come back for some sort of an extension.
So do they have ADA trailers? I mean, I've seen the ones
They
with
do.
the 2
They
or 3 steps and so there's some housekeeping issues. I would never use the word permanent in any of our ordinance for this. Short-term and long-term seems to be the right words for trailer facilities. I don't like the word permanent at all. And I do think that whatever it is that we do, that if we allow the trailers here, that they are registered with the city, and that the city has the right to go and make sure that they are maintained properly, and that that information is on file. And I think one of the questions that I'd like to know is it going to cost us money to do that? Is it going to cost the city money if we get 3, 4, 5 of these in the city, which it could happen, right? That if they all have to be registered, we all have to have the opportunity to go, code enforcement has the right to go and make sure that they're maintained properly. That means structurally and cleanliness, of course.
So just to kind of summarize what I think you're saying, you possibly would be okay with a long-term use of this as long as we created a permitting process. And as part of the permitting process, there were some stipulations on maintenance, screening, things like that, and granting us, the city, authority to. Now, let's talk about resources. We do have limited resources because at some point in time, everybody here's been to a special event or been to some sort of event. We don't go into restrooms at a restaurant or a lot of our businesses and inspect their bathrooms. We would be creating a situation that now the city would be possibly required to do that, and it would take some additional resources. It'd be something that would take away from some of our code enforcement or our building department stuff. So it would require.
You start looking at it, you got short-term, long-term. Do you have a third category as convenience?
Yeah, I think that's, from the staff perspective, that's where I would lean towards, is trying to figure out how to, so we have a single situation right now where somebody wants to use this as a permanent use, or long-term use, whatever you want to define it as.
Right.
And you have a situation where that location is off of the road. I'm going to describe a scenario in my brain. It's off the road. It can't be seen. It's not something we deal with on a regular basis because it's out of sight, out of mind. Now, envision everything that we're describing on this piece of property right over here on 146 where Fatty's used to be. If somebody shows up at my permitting department and says, I want to permit temporary restrooms, I want to put a tent up, and I want to start selling tacos.
Right. And I think, and that's one of the things we discussed before, is that it seems like we need to tie these trailers to a brick and mortar. And because if we don't, then we're going to have 2 and 3 mobile. We're going to affect our brick and mortar, and I don't think that's right in my mind. I have a problem with that. But so, getting back to the question earlier about whether or not we have the resources, do we need to charge for the permit? And I think we don't have to make that decision tonight, but should we? And should we have to be able to take care of the paperwork? You know, is that $50 a month? I don't know what it would be. That would be a decision that you guys could come up with, let us know what it's gonna take. Because we have to make sure that if we have a named storm in the Gulf, it doesn't even have to be a named storm, we could have 50, 60-mile-an-hour winds easy in this area. You know, we've got to be able to, the city needs to be able to go out and make sure that they are not gonna end up in someone else's property.
Let me throw this out just as a scenario. So our three scenarios are for permanent, convenience, and for public purpose. That's how I would define our park, for public purpose. I have had some conversations with legal, and there's nothing in statute or nothing in any of our code regulations that would prohibit us from using a temporary trailer for a long-term purpose or long-term use at one of our city parks and having regulations that prohibit it somewhere else. And I know politically that's a whole conversation to have somewhere else, but it happens all over the place. We're dealing with it now. Over at the county park, within the floodplain, they got porta potties over at the baseball fields.
In Harrison.
And if you go down to Galveston on the seawall, the city of Galveston puts those things out. They do not allow this anywhere else for long-term use. It's something that, again, it's taxpayer-funded situations, and regardless of what we do at our park, I think at some point in time, it's not going to be the long-term cure for what we're going to be doing down at the park on Main Street. Because you're going to find that this thing's going to deteriorate. It's going to wear out in 3 to 5 years, and we're probably going to be looking at other options. So even at that location, the fix for that location, even if we allow and we circumvent some of our own ordinances because of public good, it's probably something that somebody in the near future is going to have to deal with because you're going to continually buy these expensive trailers. But it is an option for us down there, and it wouldn't legally put us in a situation where anybody could address it in other ways. Again, it's up for you guys to decide. I'm looking for guidance, so when I write this, I'm not writing it 3 or 4 times. I want to get something in front of you that I think you guys feel is important.
And this is not an unusual, I'm sorry, Ron, it's not an unusual situation. We already have these kinds of ordinance where the city is allowed, for instance, billboards. The city could put up a billboard for the public good where a private individual could not put up a billboard. So it's not that this is an unusual situation.
That's correct.
Sorry, thank you.
So for restaurants, they are inspected by health departments.
That's
By
correct.
the health department. What does the city currently do for the restrooms, are the facilities of a restaurant? Is there any permitting or inspections?
So we contract directly with Harris County Health, and so they serve as our provider for our health department services, and they do an annual inspection on all our restaurants for us every year. So they're going in and looking at that. If there's a complaint about sanitation or any of those things, we guide them to contact directly Harris County Health, and then they go look at it. Typically, they have a reporting system, and they'll report that stuff to us periodically on what's going on. We used to get a full report from them on all our restaurants annually of what they did, what they had.
So wouldn't this fall under their purview then, if there was a
It would.
temporary
Could.
restroom?
It could. For a health department,
Because
so
their customers are using it, and it's a sanitation issue. And their food handlers are probably using it as well,
So as we look at this also, I mean, you're identifying one instance. So as I write the ordinance, or I draft this ordinance for y'all's review, you're talking about restaurants. Are you thinking that we just isolate the allowance to a hospitality use for temporary restrooms? Because I could see somebody else coming forward who just has a business use, and maybe I don't want to make the investment to meet my restroom requirements. And now I'm coming to the city and saying, I got a business, but I don't want to put restrooms in right now because my business, I can't afford to bust up the concrete, do everything I need to do in a strip center, and I want to put a portalet in the back of my building, and you got to go to the outhouse to go to the bathroom. And you're letting the restaurants do it, so I should be able to do it too. So again, as I'm thinking about how to draft this, I'm throwing out we've done this for a long time, so I'm gonna throw out all these loopholes that are
But
gonna
you
come
you
up.
can
At some
carry
point
that
in time, I
to a
gotta
residence too, for that matter. I mean, if somebody's building a house and they don't want to put a bathroom in, and they don't want to put the plumbing in, just
Yep.
put a trailer underneath it.
Plus, we have
Is that
short-term
what you have
rentals.
at your house?
We have short-term rentals in Seabrook, and
Well,
it would not be on the stretch for somebody to have a party
yeah.
and have a bathroom outside, have a tent outside, whatever.
I mean,
And
we could restrict residential, couldn't we, if we decided?
I'm just throwing it out, absolutely, I think that'd be one thing. The other thing too is the type. Like for the market days, they have a porta potty. And we're gonna have porta potties, there's nothing that can impact your value of your property than having a porta potty across the street forever. So there should be a time limit on that. As far as the maintenance goes, I think the city's gonna have to come up with criteria for how it has to be maintained. Because those things aren't cheap. And it would influence the business owner to have an understanding of the total expense on it. One of the things that P&Z may not be familiar with is our park down on Bayside. One of the things that turned it into a park is we got a grant from the Port of Houston, but part of it is educational. So if we have a school bus full of kids down there, we're probably going to have a facility for them to use. The other thing is, if you drive that down Main, you have 10 to 20 cars there almost every night fishing, and there's no place other than the bushes, and that's what they do use. So that would be the thing. Of course, to have it there, to have it screened, that's one thing. When we looked at putting a permanent restroom in there, the cost was a little more, correct me if I'm wrong, Gail, $600,000 to $800,000. And the other side of that is, if you have a barrel come through, it'll scrape that completely clean. So that $600,000 to $800,000 would wind up in Merline's parking lot. So that's just some of the other things. But I think if we have on-trailer screened, that something we're going to have to address because we have businesses down there, as Sean mentioned, want to expand their activity, but it's cost prohibitive to put a restroom at 21 and 22 feet. There's one other thing too. I know on social media there's some people that have talked about a backwater valve that's FEMA approved. This Rascal and Company and Joe McCall, Jesse Jones. But that backwater valve does not relieve the community of meeting the elevation requirements. So you can have a backwater valve, but your bathroom still better be 1 foot above flood. And that's why looking at temporary extended stay type facilities.
Is there any place else in the country that in your research or even in the state or that has to do with something?
So P&Z will laugh at what you just said because they deal with me a lot when they have to go through this. I'm really good, or maybe bad at, I don't like to create a wheel, I like to steal a wheel. So in all these cities, typically they have an ordinance or something in place that somebody's dealt with most of the situations that we deal with. And I can go online and search Unicode and find all these codes and do comparatives and blend it into something that works for us. I have searched everywhere, and in the state of Texas, there is nobody who allows a temporary restroom facility to circumvent the requirements of the plumbing code to have permanent restroom facilities.
So we could be a trendsetter.
Well, I think either a trendsetter or we're heading down a road we shouldn't tiptoe down. So I think there's a way to address some of the stuff that we're talking about. There could be a waiver process at some point in time. If somebody wants to use it for a longer period use, I think again, I agree with Tom that you change the terminology from permanent to long-term, and you guys allow them to have a waiver for a certain period of time. And within that waiver requirement, over a certain period of time, they do have to make the investment to put in the permanent facility because, again, you're bringing them back into compliance in the realm of the code. But because typically the only reason to do this, y'all, is financial. It's only economic. It's no other things that anybody could make the investment and put this in. And other cities are making people make this investment. They're making people spend the money to elevate their bathrooms, have those things. I know it was hit on, but FEMA, I always want to bring this up because it's something that we have a lot of discussions over, is our FEMA regulations are mandated to us to adopt a model ordinance. And so they'll always tell, if you call FEMA right now, they'll tell you it's your ordinance, it's the city's ordinance, it's their job, but they do give you a model ordinance that you gotta adopt a certain model basic ordinance. And one of the requirements of that ordinance is the only thing it can be below base flood is it use storage, limited storage, it's not even storage anymore, it's limited, access to the building and a garage. Those are the only things, uses you can have below base flood. So when you start getting into bathrooms and things like that, if they come audit us like they do every 5 years, they find that stuff, they will make us, make individuals tear that stuff out. And so we get audited every 5 years. If they put that restroom in on the first year, and 4 years later FEMA shows up, we will be as a city going out and telling somebody after 4 years to tear something out that they've had for 4 years. That politically, and just even for staff, is just not a situation I think we ever want to get in. So I just want to lean towards, right now, as long as FEMA is still in control and federal government's dictating how we manage flood insurance, I would always push really hard for you guys not to do anything to violate those ordinances, because they do audit us.
And I think too, like you hit on about FEMA, right? With the uncertainty of how long, if FEMA is even going to be FEMA, and then if you know, my guess, like in Texas, if they ever do away with, if the federal government ever does away with FEMA, TDEM will then take over basically jurisdiction over all of what FEMA used to do for Texas. You know, so then, you know, we could go through everything, and then in 6 months FEMA could be done with, and then TDM could take over and make up their own rules along the way. But I think also too, if we do decide to go forward with this, we need to make sure there is wording in the ordinance of punishment, like financial fines, because if we decide to go through it, and then, you know, and I agree with Tom, like once a named storm gets into the Gulf, you know, if we decide to go through with this, any temporary restroom needs to be removed from the property immediately. Because once a named storm comes into the Gulf, we may have a few days, or we may have, you know, even shorter than that before it actually is going to affect our area. So I think that's one thing too that we need to, especially because of our location, like strongly consider, like there needs to be some really hard, steadfast wording of, one, if a business is allowed to have one and they choose not to move it, then one, you know, the city has the right to move it off their property and at a cost of X dollars, and then that business is also going to be penalized as well for not abiding by the rules that are set in place.
One other thing about FEMA, you may or may not know, is if they come in and do the audit, and they find that you're not in compliance with the National Flood Plan, then they will put you on probation, which means that everybody's individual flood insurance rate will go up. That's on probation. If you're suspended, you cannot renew your flood. Your homeowners or business, all of them are frozen. They will let you go out, but you can't renew it. So that's what's at jeopardy if we don't adhere to the FEMA requirements.
So what do you guys feel as a group, besides being awful quiet, you guys?
So let me say this. I think it's really important to test the will of council, Jim, because planning and zoning is not going to, let's just play it and have, if planning and zoning said, we don't want to do anything temporary, and then city council says we do, well, I think P&Z would try to make the best ordinance possible and, you know, not go against the will of council. But if council doesn't want to do it, then we could stop right now, right? I mean, we let them have a straw vote and be done. Or if we say we just want to do an area that's public good and nothing else, then, you know, I think that's a much easier problem.
I can tell you, Gary, what we want is as many ideas as we can on the table, because we've been dealing with this for years now. And it seems like every couple of months, the community comes out with some new something or another.
Okay.
And so we're looking for ideas, and then we need a consensus that we're all making the right decision, because we're struggling with it, or we would have already done something.
Well, all right, so I talked to Sean earlier about some of the issues I have. I'll just go ahead and state them. And I come from a different place because it's been a long 30 plus years with ExxonMobil. So worked in an industrial setting where we had to do things in hurricane prep. Got a named storm, had to do things. You know, it's easy if you have the resources. So ExxonMobil, named storm, you got the resources. Same for the city. If the city has a named storm out there, there's things to do. When it comes to a trailer restroom anywhere else, that restaurant has not a concept how to get hold of anybody in a storm. If you only got 12 hours to get anything, they're not going to be able to manage that. That thing is going to be a mess. You know, might as well just assume that. So the comments about enforcement, you know, are important. And I've got some comments there when we go there. The other thing is I've lived through non-compliance, particularly the shipping container that took out Papados, you know, and it was not necessarily a compliance issue, it was just came in from the sea and it took pilings and that's it. So these things have a way of unintended consequences, so to speak. So, you know, a trailer at barge could go through Mario's front door and you go, whoa, you know, I didn't anticipate that. So I think it's important that we recognize that temporary or sort of permanent, you know, that these things aren't anchored. I'm hearing that it probably needs to be FEMA compliant, so it's got to be on wheels or whatever. But I think it's going to be very interesting how we ever do the wording to make sure that we can force compliance. And so, what I did wonder is whether things could be bonded, you know, so figure out a way to write some sort of bond, so they basically have a contract with somebody that if they didn't move it, they pay out such to the city, or whatever it is. And the other idea I heard was at least make it so it's compatible with whatever the city can do. The city has trucks that can move things. But keep in mind that if it's at the barge and they got to move it, there's no place to move that thing. You know, where's the guy going to take his restaurant with the restroom when the highways are backed up and everything else? So, you know, being able to at least put it in a little higher ground out of the way would be okay, but that's something the city's not in the habit of being in that kind of business.
We don't want to be, we don't want the liability.
We don't want that, yeah, you don't want to be in that. So it's kind of,
It's
so
not going to be in the city's name, but we don't want that.
right, so I see compliance is very difficult to enforce with everything's going on. So that, and I just, and even if people are well-intentioned, and I expect anybody who does this, is going to be well-intentioned, but I think it's going to be very difficult to make sure that things don't happen.
And also-
One more clarification on how this relates to an RV. Because I mean, there is a lot of similarities to whether or not it's an RV or whether it's this porta potty. Got the same gray water, it's got the same electrical, got so on and so forth. So
In the model ordinance from FEMA, our floodplain ordinance, there is a section that addresses recreational vehicles. And the interpretation, when we got the interpretation from FEMA, if we could have these vehicles, he said it doesn't speak to the temporary restroom, trailer restroom. However, it kind of meets the same criteria as an RV. So as long as it's highway ready and it's registered so it can be pulled out, it was the gentleman from FEMA's interpretation that it would be a vessel, like an RV. It wouldn't be a structure, and you could have it in the floodplain. The conversation, I think that's an interesting conversation to have as we work through this process, is he specifically in his interpretation said it couldn't be attached to public utilities, permanently affixed. But an RV in an RV park, typically you may have a hose and they have an outlet and stuff like that. So as we work through this process, what I would probably recommend is I'll work with Nick and we'll send a further RFI back to FEMA and say, could it be interpreted, since it's being interpreted as this type of vessel, could it be interpreted if they had a sewer inlet and they were going to connect that type of hose to it, connect water to it like you do an RV, would that still meet the standard? And so it's something we'd have to follow.
including FEMA.
That's correct, FEMA. We would communicate with
Okay, that
FEMA
was
to
my
get another
question.
interpretation on that.
Jared,
So, I got about 2 or 3 things. So, if we were to allow these, trailer, the porta potties on trailers, would they be purchased by the individuals, or are they going to be like rented out from
there's a rental pool. I mean, there's a rental company.
Yeah.
And then, can we, like, include something that, like, if they rent them, whoever they rent them from has to have a plan in place for fast removal. The other thing, so yeah, we talk about named storms in the Gulf having time frame. One thing that Texas learned this year, and with the hill country floods, is you can have torrential rainfall and hit your community within a matter of hours, and then in those situations you don't really have time to remove them. And then one more for you. So I deal with the federal government at work all the time, and you can talk to 4 people at the same agency at the federal government, and those 4 people will give you 9 different interpretations of the rule. And so that's also, I feel like that maybe the concerning too is, like, we could talk to Jimmy at FEMA, and he could say one thing, well then, like, a month later, Sally at FEMA is going to say, oh no, y'all can do this. And that's also where you could run into the issues down the road of, hey, we did our due diligence and we talked to y'all give us this guidance, but then now you're saying, we can't as well, so.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. So one thing we do to help offset that experience is our initial communication for this communication was directly to the director of FEMA Region 6, which is our district.
Mm-hmm.
He sent us to the person who's over regulatory, and he gave us that interpretation. One thing that we're really good about doing, and I have this, is keeping files. I make sure people give this stuff in writing. So at some point in time during a cab, if somebody's going to try to deem us for some of the things that we are allowing that we've gotten interpretations for, I'm ready to give that information in writing that this was an interpretation that came from you, and this is how we're dealing with it. And we can appeal as we go through the process. So that's our protocols, because I agree with you. The turnover at FEMA is insane. Even during an emergency event, during a hurricane, a tropical storm, as we're going through recovery and getting our funds back, we will deal with 5, 6 different people through the whole process. To the extent that 10 years down the road, when you have to do closeout, someone shows up, most staff's probably not even here anymore, and you're trying to find this stuff. So it's a complex process, but we're really good, because we know it's a complex process, to document and make sure we have that information.
Let me ask you, FEMA says it has to be road ready. So hurricane comes, it's road ready, but it's not hauled off. Does that impact us?
Well, I think it will impact us, because it's back to the same scenario. Many of you were here during Hurricane Ike, some of you weren't here, but the impacts of that storm shows, I always joke with Nick. For the first 10 years after Hurricane Ike, I never had to debate with anybody in this community about our building code compliance and what you had to do and why you had to do it, because they saw the results when you get a storm like that. This city was devastated. We lost 3,000 houses during that storm. It was an insane event. You really saw down Toddville, Old Seabrook, where the water came up. We had wave activity on top of it, which people don't think about. It's just not static rise. And the devastation of that wave activity, it blows everything out from underneath those houses. And we lost a lot of those houses because they had structural walls, because they were built in the 60s. Things happen. So our compliance with these codes are important. As we go through the process, when the same situation happened on the Point, Gary kind of referenced that. We had road-ready semi-trailers down there that they use as reefer units at those seafood markets, and they couldn't get them out, because it's the scenario that Gary's talking about. Everybody's leaving here. You can't get back in. And so for you to prioritize, again, I'm going to come down, I'm going to pick up this trailer, I'm going to get stuck in traffic for 4 hours to try to get out of here, and then I got to come back at some point in time, and where am I going to put this? It usually doesn't happen. So we had semi-trailers down there when the surge came in at about 10 feet down there on the Point, It picked all that stuff up and it slammed it into all those buildings and we lost Papados.
Okay, but my question though is in terms of jeopardy with FEMA. So we have a trailer portable restroom. It's at XYZ, it's road ready, ready to go, hurricane hits the Gulf, it's not towed off, and damage occurs, whatever. But does FEMA come in and say, because you didn't haul it off, here's your penalty?
I haven't experienced that. They don't, there's so much
Okay, so
devastation.
what we're looking at,
typically.
the potential liability then would be the damage of this thing being smashed into businesses
Damaging
and stuff
personal
like that.
property, but not any recourse that FEMA's gonna come back and say they're not gonna do a payout because.
Yeah, because in one of the incentives, these things aren't cheap. They're about $600,000. If they're renting them or whatever, I would think whoever is the owner would have an incentive to come get it.
But that even, I think, like, part of the problem with that though is, well, which, and I agree with you that they should come get them, but then, you know, they're also, they probably have thousands of them. They're not gonna in the whole Houston area.
They're not gonna come get it.
Yeah, and then even,
I personally have 1,700 storage units around the area. There's no way I'm gonna go and get all those, you know. You gotta remember, storms sometimes start in the middle of the Gulf. You don't have a week, you know, you're not
Right.
watching across Cuba and, you know, the European model, the US model is gonna come here and start, you know, that about going and collecting stuff when you,
Not
a
tracking spaghetti
storm.
rolls and.
It's not gonna happen, you know, but what my main concern is the permanent structures and all these temporary structures. If you have a permanent business, you should have the permanent structure. You know, maybe at the beginning, we can give you a temporary permit during construction but at some point, you gotta stop the temporary stuff that's movable and flyable, and it's gotta be permanent.
There for a long time.
I think we gotta get back to that point. You know, if you have a permanent business that's ongoing, you have to follow the rules. You just can't keep on going with temporary. It's eventually, and we know it's gonna happen, it's gonna end up somewhere in Pasadena or someone's house.
Well, even during, we had that one house that was started on the water and floated across the lake.
We gotta look, I think that's something that we really have to decide here.
I think Tom was at that point.
Are
He
we-
didn't want anything.
Are we,
permanent.
well, you got to. You just can't keep on going temporary, whether you call it short-term temporary, long-term temporary.
You mean building a brick and mortar?
Building a brick and mortar, if you got a permanent business that's there, you know, all the time, you can't do temporary. And then you're gonna have those other issues of apartments coming in with other businesses going, well, you know, we're having a clubhouse, but the bathroom for the clubhouse is gonna be outside on the trailer.
So please, let me give you a scenario, see if we can help us answer this question. Because we have been fighting exactly what you're talking about for a long time. You got Reliance who wants to open up downstairs, and they want to bring in a trailer, and they want to be able to open up downstairs. Because they see the restaurant on National, or bar restaurant on National Run has done the same thing. They've got a trailer, and they think that they should be able to have one as well. Now, we also have Bayside Park that we know that we need restrooms for. So we're trying to figure out, well, how do we answer the community? And how do we get some type of facility down at Bayside Park? That's the issue that we're really fighting with. Because I agree, and whatever all of you're saying is, we've addressed that. We just haven't figured out how to solve it yet.
You gotta hardline it. You gotta get on a hard line and just say, this is it. You know, and I understand the difference between the private and the public sector with Bayside Park and Harris County and all that. You know, there sounds to me like there could be a gray line in there. But for the private sector, you gotta hardline it. You gotta stop this, because you know we're gonna get hit. We're gonna get hit with a bigger storm than Ike. And no one is gonna come and say, okay, well, I promise you I'm gonna move all this stuff around. It's not gonna happen. I guarantee you it's not gonna happen.
And I agree, and that's why we need to have something.
You gotta hardline it. If you're
gonna say, hey, look, if you
you're
don't
gonna
do
be
this,
there
you're gonna
open
pay-
every day, and
pay
you're gonna have 500 people in this building, follow the codes, have the bathrooms in there. I'm sorry if you can't get compliant, if you don't have the funds to meet the city codes. Sorry.
Set a
You
time
know,
limit.
you shouldn't be in business.
Agreed.
But if you need temporary while you're building, da-da-da-da, that's something else, but don't make it so you just can keep
But,
coming back every 6
right,
months,
a hard
every year,
fast-
and ask for a
A
variance,
hard
a
fast
variance,
deadline
variance,
on-
variance.
on
Because you
what
know
temporary.
eventually, the bad thing's gonna happen.
Right, 100%.
You know, you could be a year for, your long-term one could be a year, and then everything else below that's going to be, all right, we got 6 months for the temporary, or a month, or whatever it is. But your long-term ones should be, all right, this is what it is, and it should be the same rule for, whether it's for city stuff or for the people, it should be exactly the same thing. It shouldn't be different standards for either. It should be exactly the same across the board.
I think the other thing is that if we're into that very short time frame, then things like screening might be fence as opposed to cinder block and stuff like that. So I think once you set the timeline, then I think it sets a lot of the other peripheral things that you probably want in there, so if it's visible from the road, you at least are not going to create an eyesore. But it doesn't have to be cinder block and durable and everything.
It's gonna meet building codes, you know, Nick's not gonna allow something that, a bathroom that's gonna end up in Pasadena.
You let your house be
Besides, all the fishing guys use my bushes for the.
I think we're gonna
Next
start,
discussion. Go, monkey bushes that.
you can start a concession.
And I think, it's almost like the cost of doing business, right? I mean, if you're gonna be
It is the
a
cost
brick
of
and
doing
mortar,
business.
you,
If
you're
you
gonna
can't
have
afford
to.
to do business, Tommy knows, you know, he has a restaurant, I have a restaurant. If you can't stay up on the codes, you're not in business.
And ultimately, if you look at Old Seabrook and all of those small lot buildings and everything, and if a storm ever came through, you're gonna end up with things that look like Merlion. Everybody there is gonna need to make the investments that Merlion did. So if you don't have some way to gangway across streets and stuff like that. So if you think far enough ahead and what a hurricane would look like with Old Seabrook on, you would be having this discussion in spades, because they would definitely be using this ordinance. Oh, you let me use the bathroom and it would be semi-permanent. Yeah, but there's no building. So that's all it would take. So,
Anyone else? You're being awful quiet.
Just taking it all in.
No, I mean, so kind of let me summarize what I'm hearing, because I'm going to put something together. As a group, I mean, we're not voting on anything tonight, but just general guidance. Long-term use, or it needs to remain temporary use, and then I create some standards around the typical uses that we already have when I put my little thing. So currently previously I went through this list. So right now, this is where we allow temporary restroom uses. Special events, construction sites. The construction site allowance is actually in the building codes. So there's a building code requirement in our adopted building code right now. If you have an active construction site and you don't have plumbed restrooms, you have to provide temporary restroom facilities during the time of construction. And then it states, upon issuance of the C of O, certificate of occupancy, that has to be removed. So there's some standards in place already for that. Disaster emergency situations, and then the special agreement or arrangements, I don't think we need to address that, because it's always going to be a special circumstance where somebody's coming to council and trying to present to them that there was a natural disaster. We need to have, like we're dealing with the business on Nass Road 1, it's special condition, they were damaged during construction and trying to get back on their feet. You guys have the ability. So I don't think, even if I don't need to address that as part of this process, because part of that agreement, you guys have the authority to write any special condition into that agreement as you want. So if you want it screened, you want it in a certain location, you guys as part of that agreement have the ability. It's like a conditional use permit. You guys have the ability to address everything that you want to address as part of the agreement.
There's got to be a time limit on it too.
And typically, there's going to be a time limit, because again, it's got to be for that type of agreement, for somebody not to challenge it somewhere else within the community. At some point in time, it's got to be reasonable, the time limit that you're allowing, or it can't be interpreted by somebody else possibly that you're really allowing it as a permanent use. So do you feel that we don't want to deal with it as an allowance for a permanent or long-term use, and then I just write ordinance language around these other ones where, like under special events, we've dealt with it in the past. It's allowed during a special event, but I create ordinance language that says it has to be a certain distance. If it's a residential or next to a residential use, it's got to be a certain distance away. Go ahead, buddy.
One other thing, down on Main Street, I believe y'all just passed approval for the Main Street open market, which will be the last, or one Friday and Saturday a month. We also have the Texas Farm to Market, which is 2 Saturdays a month. So right now, for special events and porta potties, we have 3 weekends per month in Old Seabrook.
It's getting ready to be every week.
Well,
I mean,
it's-
they're working on
and
it.
also you have Genuine Treasures, which how often do they do theirs?
I don't think she brings anything in for hers, but she does hers monthly, right?
Yeah, she has, maybe she doesn't. But I'm just saying, we have porta potties 3 weekends a month down there. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying I support it or I don't. I'm just saying it's there. You would have to answer when somebody comes up and says, wait a minute, got porta cans down here 3 weekends out of the month. And we're talking about a $600,000 trailer that's behind the screen. So,
But those I look at those are different events.
I understand.
All right, they have to be out within whatever the time
They
limit
do.
is, 3
They have to be
days.
out. I'm just saying,
You can't leave them there the whole time waiting for the next event 2 weeks or next
no,
month.
I'm with you there, but what I'm going is, it was 9 months ago we had 0. And now we're at 3 weekends a month. And it would not take much to say, gee, well, let's get a 4th one. It's the same thing with our friends down at the farms and a number of special events that they want. I'm just looking for guidance and answers and you know, like we're all looking for.
Yeah,
Okay, let me ask you, we have an arbitrary number for special events, do we not?
Correct.
And this is something you inherited.
Yes.
So there's no formula for the number of special events. So if I'm a business, I'm saying, hey, I make my money, just like the folks right next to Wine and Cheese. They were talking about how well they do. I can understand that. But going forward with the restroom facilities, how do we address it?
If they're gonna remove them every single time, it's gonna cost them money, because it's gonna cost somebody money to come out there, pick them up, haul them off.
It's
bring
all
them
part of
back.
their business plan, and that's, you know, that's their deal. I'm just saying, this is what our citizens are looking at. There'll be a lot of supporters from the board saying, hey, got it down on Main, these are just little porta potties. We've got these really nice trailers up here behind the screen.
But those are temporary permits
I understand.
compared to a permanent business.
I'll refer them to you and you can.
So can I add a little to that? So I think at some point in time, so right now I have started working on the special events permit ordinance. So it's in kind of process of modifying, updating that. It's something Gail asked me to work on, so I'm working on it. My question to you is, as we talk about special events, in our zoning ordinance, it could be easily interpreted. There's a difference between a special event, which is you make an application. A special event is something that occurs 4 times a year, 5 times a year, whatever we identify. And the difference between you all issuing a conditional use permit for a use now to be allowed by right for somebody to have an open air market. That's a whole different thing. I mean, in my mind, it's different. So I want some input from you guys, because once you grant that permanent allowance, if you don't set conditions where they can only have 1 or 2 markets a year, it is a use. It's no different than any other use. And do they have to require, or should they be required to provide permanent restrooms if they're doing it on private property? I mean, the market that we're doing on our property is totally different, y'all, because you guys can set standards. You can say how they do things and stuff, because it's our properties by agreement. But when you're approving this use through the zoning process, when you grant that CUP, it's no different than if somebody just showed up at Nick's office and said, I want to pull a permit, my use is open air market, and I want to operate and function. Within our zoning ordinance right now, it addresses that if you have that type of use, you have to provide restroom facilities. It doesn't say permanent right now, but it says restroom facilities. Because back in those days, this really probably wasn't a discussion, it was just assumed that you were going to have to put in permanent restroom facilities as part of the use because it's a permanent use. So as we go through this, where I'm looking for is guidance on, do you want me to kind of address it that way? Are you okay with what Buddy just brought up and having issues with all ones? You could have a permanent allowance, Jennifer's Treasures, whichever uses you want to think about down there that have CUPs. Same thing with the cheese company. They're having an event next door on an individual piece of property that they now have a CUP to operate that market. Now there is something, let me kind of digress because I'm going to correct myself a little bit. Within our zoning ordinance, it says you can't have an agreement with an adjacent property owner as long as that restroom facility is within 500 feet. So the plumbing code addresses that you have to have a restroom within 500 feet. Where that all came from at one point in time with the code council is you had a lot of kiosks at grocery stores where they had gas stations attached to a grocery store, and then the grocery store itself was by itself, and there was a debate on if you could walk back and forth to go to the bathroom, so that 500 foot got kind of established as part of that. But as we go through this process, how do you guys as a group, I mean consensus, what's your opinion, how do you want to address that situation? Because it's a valid conversation that permanent use is no different than a bar showing up or an outdoor venue showing up and saying, I have an outdoor environment, my use is allowed by right, and I want to use temporary restrooms like the farmers markets do, or we're currently on Main Street. So again, how you guys, I mean, opinions?
In the wine and cheese, they have a porta potty out there for their event.
Is there an occupancy standard for open air markets?
There isn't.
There is
I
not.
mean,
So
well, it would be
Seabrook
treated
is
as a
doing
use
it
and-
as a courtesy, not as a necessity.
Yeah, so within the building code, there is a use that we could associate with that. That's what Nick used. So when we have open air or outdoor market events or our events, there is a category within the code that you can go classify that as, and then based on the number of occupants they feel they're going to have. Now, we usually, typically in that situation, we're not going to use the building code to establish that occupant load. We can easily do that. It basically ends up being for every 15 square feet that you have, it counts as an occupant, or it could be even downgraded to 7 square feet, depending on kind of uses. And then we could establish a minimum restroom requirement. But there is standards in the code to create that. Comments?
Sean, I'm going to go back to Buddy's point. Refresh my memory on when we allowed the open air markets as a use. We didn't state anything about restrooms, is that correct then?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So it sounds like we have maybe a little glitch in our conditional use permit that we at least ought to be thinking about those kind of things. If that's kind of one that we probably should.
Well, and that's the great thing about CUPs. Again, conditional use permits are like PUDs. I mean, you have the authority or the ability to set standards. So as we approve those, I don't really probably need to write a direct ordinance on the CUP because you can build that standard into
Right.
the motions that you're making
You just
to
need to
approve.
be the checklist of things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily do that, but when Buddy brought that up, I do see a difference on, by definition, how we categorize stuff in zoning. There's a whole different classification between a special event and approval of a CUP, because we normally grant multiple variances through the process of the approval of the special events permit. Because we allow people to put bandit signs in our right of way. There's a lot of things that by law are prohibited in our ordinances, but we grant a special allowance because it's a special event, it's limited, it's short in time. We allow certain things to occur, temporary restrooms, signage, there's all kinds of things I can think of. Temporary parking, you may not have associated parking on the property, and we allow them to do off-site parking. All those things come into play on special events. When you grant a CUP, typically from the staff perspective, we try, sometimes we miss it, we kind of missed it on some of what you were just mentioning possibly, but we try to communicate that we would put these elements in place as part of conditions because they could become a nuisance if you don't do so.
And so that condition regarding the restroom, we did talk about it at the council meeting, but we did not put it in as part of the condition that they have a restroom. I think the restroom is for convenience, so that people don't have to go in the restaurant because there's enough occupancy in the restaurant.
And I think
And we did
that
address
condition
that.
Should there be a convenient category?
I think we could write that in, I mean, for convenience. I think you gotta weigh the hazard. I mean, I think that's the conversation that we've had as a group, is once you allow it, is it gonna be moved? And I think that's the conversation. I mean, and I'm okay, ultimately you guys, I'm just trying to get guidance because I'll write this stuff anyway, you guys give me guidance, but I think that's something you gotta focus on, is the conversation we had earlier. If you allow this temporary use, is it really ever gonna be moved in the event? And how do you limit the number at some point in time? And how do you want to address aesthetics? I think we haven't hit on that a lot, but there's an aesthetic issue to this, which comes back to one of those categories had on there. Compliance with zoning and how you work with the architectural element of this. Does it have to be screened? So, I mean, I'm going to throw that question out to you because as I write this, do you feel, regardless of what I've put together initially, does it have to be screened in some sort of element where you can't really just see it right back?
We wouldn't do that for a temporary, like a porta potty for a weekend event. That would be
No.
silly, but for a long-term or a shorter long-term, permanent, not permanent, not that word.
That's not a good word.
Extended word.
Something similar to a dumpster.
So some of the
Yeah,
notes that I've
right,
taken
exactly.
down, like what it seems like a consensus is that we need to define the terms of long-term use is kind of one of the
I think that's a valid
expectations that
point,
you
yes.
have. Like that seems like a priority is to define the scope of what that means. And then a couple questions to tag on to that. Or one comment, and I think Jared said the same thing. I don't think we should go into a rules for thee and not for me, especially with our current state of, citizens. I think that would just not be the right choice. So I think that whatever standard we establish, we should abide by it holistically and not just us versus them.
Sure.
And then my questions are, can you require ownership of a trailer? For same as with housing, oftentimes if you have ownership, you take better care. So can that requirement be built
Absolutely.
into the?
We could say that if you're going to use it for, I think at some point in time when we define long-term versus short-term, it's going to be typically all the information that I was finding, because I was researching a lot of this guy, y'all. Short-term was 30 days and less. Anything beyond 30 days was defined as long-term. Just by using everything that everybody uses. I looked on chat, did some things, and that's the stuff I kept spitting out. So at some point in time, you're going to define it. If short-term, you could probably create an element of requirement that it could be a rental unit, but anything beyond 30 days, it had to be owned if you guys were going to go that way to have some sort of long-term use. Absolutely.
And then the second part is something that I written down and Jared touched on it, but from a standpoint of if you require ownership, can you also then require a removal plan as part of the process?
Absolutely. You could absolutely do that.
And then the third question I had, and that's going to the Bayside Park extension, I believe one of the discussions was to build an encasement for the trailer, and then the trailer would pull in there and it would also house it in the instance of storms. So I know that's a, hefty requirement. Also, money is something like that, something that we could include.
That would have to be
I
a
don't-
breakaway, not a permanent facility.
Yeah, you're never going to build a screening device below base flood in the areas we're talking about that would sustain those forces. It's going to come apart. Even in that area, you would be in direct conflict if you built that structure that would withstand that activity, because in the V zone, a velocity zone, anything below base flood, any enclosure has to be a breakaway wall system, and it's got to break away at like 20 pounds per square inch. So anything that was in there is going to come apart anyway.
I might have misremembered our Bayside discussion.
But
So
this-
are trailers, like porta potties on trailers, are they ADA compliant? And would they need to be, how does that play?
there's
into-
always going to be a requirement if that was your long-term bathroom use and you didn't have a brick and mortar where you had already an ADA compliant restroom, is going to be an ADA compliant element. You can get portalets and you can get trailer restrooms with ADA
They
compliant
have them before you.
restroom stalls.
We've
So-
gone back to what you were saying, Guy, that we would not do that. That we would not have anything that would be long-term.
But I think we should.
That's what the discussion's
I mean, that's
about,
what
is
we're
to
turning
give
all the
him.
way back around again.
Yeah,
I think,
no,
no,
we're
actually-
getting away from a permanent structure.
I think once we define the scope, but even within that scope, I don't think we're going backwards. I think we're getting closer to where we need to be. Within that scope of definition, we also will have to include, the removal plans and additional requirements.
So, I don't know a lot about these rental companies. Is there even such a rental company that the city could vet, for example, and say that the requirements, they would have to come and pick them up? 'Cause, I mean, what Guy's saying is true. I mean, I don't know that they're ever they're gonna.
We got
do it, but-
limited enforcement authority.
I'm sorry?
We have very limited enforcement authority. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we have in place. People have to remove this, remove that. I've experienced it in multiple storms. That stuff's not getting moved. It
Right.
just isn't.
I mean, if the city owns it, we'll go get it and we'll go take it, I'm talking about the one at Lakeside Park, for example.
Yeah.
If you have one there, we're gonna go take it to our
Public
facility.
works facility.
I mean,
we're going to.
that would be our responsibility. That seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, well,
But if you're a business and you're concerned about the storm coming in or whatever may happen, you don't have a whole lot of time. And you may not take
And
it.
you're not
Can
gonna
we-
force a rental company to put their people in harm's way,
Can we
you know?
Can we impose upon the trailered bathrooms an additional liability insurance policy?
I don't know. That would be something I have to discuss with David. I don't know.
And I don't know if, they may say force majeure and the storm took it away and said that we're not gonna cover that, but we may require the property owner, if you want this, you can carry additional liability insurance, should that break away and cause damage.
My pushback on that ultimately is, because I deal with this in my personal life, there's a lot of situations where you are required to bond a project. When something happens, you just don't call the bond company and they give you the money. You have to sue somebody. So you're putting somebody in a situation, even if we require that additional
I understand.
insurance, they're probably going to have to sue somebody and expend a lot of funds and time to even address that. So
I'm just looking at the injured party would have recourse and against the property owner to cause the damage. So if the fish markets down the point had liability for the breakaway of their trailers, then Piper's family could have gone back and had recourse to reclaim.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It does make me wonder though, you get into this whole windstorm versus flood, and, they get the whole blame, who's to blame.
Insurance companies are pulling out, they're not gonna insure
That's
a
true,
portable
yeah.
trailer
natural
going down and taking out
disaster or
Atlas.
personal
They're,
fault.
Cash
they're
bond, I'll
gonna
hold
say something not.
So I think, the special events and the porta potties, that's one issue we need to address, timeline. How soon before the event can you place it, and how soon after the event do you have to remove it, right? I think we definitely need to address that, because we've had to address that in these other off-site conversations we had. Then I think we sound like we're sort of in agreement with some sort of a temporary, somebody has a party, but it's gotta meet some certain specifications, less than 30 days, whatever. But, and a long-term, no later than, for a brick and mortar establishment, to Guy's point. If we establish somebody needs to do something to come into compliance with the code, but they need time to work through that process, that we allow a certain time frame for them to do that, with the understanding that at the end of that time frame, including us with the Bayside Park, that we put in a temporary restroom for a period of time to be defined, with the understanding that that'll be a permanent, at some point, FEMA approved structure. That sounds
So
reasonable.
so you would not do a public use carve out then?
I think that the city should always reserve the right to do that, but I think, right, but optically, I think we need to know if we go down this road that we're going to move toward a permanent and budget toward a permanent solution for that.
I agree 100%. If we're gonna do it right, and just, if you're gonna spend the money, I'd rather spend the money on a bathroom facility that's ours. It's not we're renting one from somebody else, we have to wait on them to come get it, come clean it, and maintain it. It's our responsibility, it's ours to deal with.
But I think we don't give up the right as a government entity to have our right to do something, right? Like the billboard situation. But we got it in this situation for if nothing else, for transparency purposes, and to show an example that we're the example, so that when the businesses come to us and say, well, but you guys can do it temporary, well, then we have a plan, we're going to make it permanent, and that's the requirement for you too.
Okay, no, I agree. It's very helpful. That's what I'm looking for, y'all, is guidance. So when I draft this up, I'm not going down rabbit trails you guys don't want to go down, y'all don't want to go down, but I'm also addressing this stuff. So thank you. I mean, this is helpful.
And I think just a small detail to those comments would also tie back to frequency, because you don't want to have one weekend this person, and then it's like it's there every weekend, but it's not the same group, and it's the partner, whatever.
That makes
But
sense.
a little corollary to the other statements.
That makes
about
sense.
frequency and location.
Similar to a special use permit that's tied to the address or to the ownership or something like that.
Because typically that becomes the loophole
Right.
that people are finding is, okay, I had it this week and 2 weeks from now I'm bringing it back, and that's, I agree.
Or like if the band's required to provide the porta potties. It's like,
What else, y'all?
I think just looking at the barge, I can see them, I have nothing against the barge whatsoever, they're friends of mine. But, they have four special permits a year, right? But they run the business 365 days a year. So they're not running a special permit just for their 4 events to put in toilets. I mean, they have to go into the super long term. Just like any other business would, just not picking on them, but any other business, you just can't say, well, we're busy during Christmas time.
Yep.
So we'll meet Christmas time standards with temporary stuff.
One thing I know all of you are aware, it's actually on council's agenda coming up on the 8th, at our meeting next Tuesday. We got a grant to rewrite the zoning ordinance. So some of the things that you're addressing, like when you start talking about those things, I think it's going to be an opportunity for us to look at uses, how we're interpreting uses, where they're allowed, how they function. And so some of those things are going to be addressed in the near future on another subject that we're working on. So there's going to be an opportunity to address holistically some of the other things that we haven't been able to address in a long time, because we've been putting Band-Aids on our zoning ordinance. We've updated our comp plan, and to bring all that back into compliance with the comp plan, I think we'll have that opportunity soon for both bodies.
Anybody have anything else? Did we kind of cover it?
Anybody else?
Sounds like
Sean,
we're
you
okay.
crystal
I'm good.
clear?
Yeah, no, I have enough information. Just, I think the hot topic on all this, and I just want clarity before we adjourn, the overwhelming consensus, or the consensus of the group overall, is we don't want long-term temporary restrooms, allowance for that. However, build something into it that if there's a special exception possibly that's beyond natural disaster for a temporary period, define short-term, long-term use in a way that it's really not permanent. It's something that may occur for maybe a month or so, or a few months, for somebody to put finances together so they can figure out a plan to put in permanent restrooms. But for the most part, they need to be in compliance with the plumbing code, and regardless, really the temporary, long-term, however, I'm just kind of verbalizing this, it's put in a situation that it should be subsidizing some sort of permanent restroom facility that they may have in a 500-foot distance. And so really you need to have the permanent in place, and if you want to subsidize it somehow, maybe there may be an allowance. As I put this together, it doesn't mean all this isn't going to change and you're going to beat the bar. I have an expectation that we're going to beat this apart as I put it together, and we'll refine it to where it's something that we really, everybody agrees with. But as a start, just creating an allowance in our ordinance and circumventing the plumbing code, and what anybody else is doing is you can use a temporary restroom for a permanent use, and we have to amend the plumbing code. That's not what anybody's interested in doing, is amending the plumbing code to allow that type of use.
By subsidized, you're talking about, like, explain that, what you mean by subsidized.
So, say, I think,
A convenience-
I'll go back
is that
to
a convenience
to Merlion or that situation. They have their required restrooms for their occupants.
Right.
And you have a situation maybe where you're trying to, for convenience or something, subsidize that, where you're creating some additional allowances. Just because you don't really need it for your occupancy load, you're trying to create a convenience. I'll use another example because I'm not, we're naming some businesses and probably normally we don't do that. But Lakewood Yacht Club, I was contacted by them recently. They have all the required restrooms that we need out there. However, they have a lot of special events. And so they contacted me and said, hey, the barge is doing this. Can we have a temporary trailered restroom out here? And normally we won't be using it other than when we have special events, but we want to build an enclosure around it. That just throws up red flags because they're probably going to use it on a permanent basis. They're going to put it out there. They're going to be using it in
They're
a way
talking about
that's
putting,
probably not
they're talking
permanent.
about plugging in
And so-
plumbing facility.
Yeah, and so they have all their required restrooms. They just want it so when they have a lot of people out there, they can subsidize or have additional restrooms, convenience to where people don't have to walk all the way back to the clubhouse or to one of the floating restrooms. Because again, it's an establishment that has, at one point in time, spent the money to put in permanent restrooms, even though they're on barges. So they have floating bathrooms. They have made the investment. This whole conversation and what we've created by allowing some of this to occur is created a situation where people are being creative now on how to do things less expensive. And I'm always going to push back on this because I've been here for a long time. We've worked very hard. I know we can always improve, but we've worked very hard to start cleaning up the city and getting us to where we want to go in the right direction. And as you approve these temporary things, when people show up and they want to put them in the corridors and people start emailing us wanting to know what the world this is, once we allow somebody to do it, we're going to have to allow everybody to do it. You can't create ordinances that we like this person, we don't like this person, we like this use, we don't like this use. And so we're going to be in that situation at some point in time. It's going to show up on a piece of property that's on prime real estate and I can't stop it. I've had two situations. I used the taco situation. That really occurred. It didn't happen on that big piece of property, but next to the car wash on Nassau Road 1, somebody owns that little triangle, and he showed up and said, I went to the barge, I saw this, I want to put up a tent, I want to put some gravel out there, and I want to put a temporary restroom because I know your code requires me to have restrooms, and I want to sell tacos all the time. And that's scary, y'all. Because, I mean, that's not, I think, what we've all worked so hard to make our community look like after we've made huge investments in the 146 corridor for the architectural elements and the things that we put in place. And I think the direction we're going is we're trying to get away from some of that. And as you create these things, I think you got to look big picture sometimes. And that's what I'm always going to try to communicate is look at the big picture. Because I had this conversation with Gary. Gary and I worked together in the zoning commission for a long time. He understands zoning. Once we approve this stuff and we decide later it's a bad idea, everything that's in place after we pass that ordinance, when we change it again, it's grandfathered. So it will remain until it's either 51% damaged or they suspend the use for 6 months. It gets very prescriptive and hard to get rid of those uses. And it'll be there even though we change the rules later. So we want to do this right now because if you do it wrong, the things that we allow or gets permitted, we were like, oh no, we shouldn't have done that. We change it, that stuff's not going away. I can't get rid of it.
Is 2021 the current plumbing code generally, or just, I know it's the one that Seabrook has adopted.
It's our adopted.
Is there a more current one?
Yeah, there's a 2024.
That is there any anything in that code that that Seabrook ever plans to eventually adopt it as the Seabrook code that may address these issues or not?
There is. So, I mean, typically, you think about modern day code, and I used this as an example earlier. I was being a little sarcastic, but I said this. We don't want to create an environment where you say you can, a developer thinks they can come to our community, build something without a bathroom. And I can use this cheap use, because again, it's expensive. So you think about it in a normal building, if you're required to have a men's and a women's bathroom, and based on your occupant load, you got to plumb all that, put all the partitions in. That's expensive, but I can go buy the $60,000 bathroom and stick outside my building. And right now, I just can't afford those. I mean, you just got to be cautious. Modern day codes don't allow you to use an outhouse. And I want to refer to it, but that's what ultimately it is. It's an outhouse, y'all. And it's not connected to the building, it's not part of the building. So, I mean, if I could have found someplace, an example of really somebody allowed this, but I couldn't find anybody in any other city. I mean, I challenge you all, because if you can find it, send it to me, because I've done a lot of searching. And because usually you just do those general searches looking for ordinances, it pops up everywhere. Because everybody who's been in my office, you guys make fun of me, I got 6 screens in there. It's because that's what I use them for. I pull up all these ordinances and I just start marrying them. So anyway. But it's...
Didn't say anything with ChatGPT.
Adjourn your meeting.
P and Z adjourned, whatever time it is, 7:25, minus 1.
There being no further business before council, the meeting is adjourned. It's 7:06.
Hey y'all, thank you so much.
Thank y'all for being here. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Yes, I like
That is,
Very similar.
I have control of my votes.
I did normal searches and
So now,
it's fun.